Hello everybody, this is Akhil Prasad and I work as the General Counsel for Boeing in India. And it's a very proud moment for me, to be here on a fire chat with none other than Gourab Banerji. And Gourab is the senior advocate. He's based in Delhi and, everybody knows him. So today we are going to speak on our views, our views on the arbitration and mediation and the progress that the arbitration has made in India, and also the proposed law for mediation, which is also gaining a lot of attention within the legal community, within the business community. And the reason for this is that, from my perspective, for a very, very long time, arbitrations, although it started with a fanfare with the various amendments and since 1996, but it used to be seen that India was not seen to be as a preferred destination for arbitrations for various reasons, because of the complexity in which we were dealing with arbitration issues, the delays, and it was just something becoming like a remedial process, a dispute remedial process before a court. And that was precisely the objective of arbitration, that things should be simplified and arbitration should be done quickly so that the disputing parties are able to progress, with their day-to-day work than, worry about arbitration. But that was precisely the problem we were facing in India. But thankfully, the last 4 or 5 years, we have seen a lot of legislative reform. We have seen some, very important judgments, coming out of our Supreme Court of India, which definitely shows the way that arbitration will definitely see a lot of change in future. And government has recently introduced, they will perhaps introduce a bill on the mediation law also, which also perhaps will be a game changer on how the parties, before going in for arbitration, will get an opportunity to mediate first. In our contracts, when we typically draft our contracts, there is always a process for conciliation and mediation before parties go out for arbitration. But it's very heartening to see that finally, we may have a law on mediation, which looks very, very promising to me. So, Mr. Banerji, before we start our fire chat, a quick, what are your thoughts, on how recently, because of the recent Supreme Court judgments, the complexion or the perception about arbitration in India is, we are looking at a change. There is a strong perception that India is doing something great on arbitration with some landmark judgments recently, and also on the mediation law. So just quickly, what are your thoughts on mediation and arbitration?
So Akhil, thank you for that lovely introduction. I think let me first focus on arbitration, because that is an area which I'm familiar with. And of course, we'll come to mediation. But really, in the last 5 years, I feel, you keep meeting people from abroad, and there has been a complete shift in their approach towards India and India-seated arbitrations. I mean, there is no doubt that maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, we were perceived very, very poorly internationally. And it is to the credit of the legislature, which has intervened in 2015 and 19, and the Supreme Court. And let's not forget the high courts also have all played their part. Industry has played its part. One major innovation is this Section 29A, which has, in a sense, forced arbitrators to finish matters within a given timeline. There was a lot of controversy when that came in. I was party to it. I was in government when we introduced it. There was a lot of pushback from seasoned arbitrators, but now they've accepted it. And I think the overall mindset has definitely changed, And I think there is a great future now if we can go on in the right path for Indian arbitration. Of course, for mediation, it is early days yet, and we'll come back and we'll obviously discuss that. But that's a major plus, so we'll come back to that.
So thank you very much, and that takes us to our first question that we wanted to deliberate on is how to use litigation in terms of arbitration and mediation as a strategy. So this is a very pertinent question because from a general counsel's point of view, when we are drafting contracts, well, often there are questions which comes to our mind is whether for a particular contract should we have arbitration mediation as a dispute resolution process, or should we have a court as a dispute resolution process, reference to a court as a dispute resolution process. So in terms of a strategy, when people come to me for advice as a general counsel, although there is a very, very strong perception that we should have arbitration, especially the international arbitration clauses in our contract for a dispute resolution. But, I usually pause and think, given the Indian dynamics, because in arbitration versus a court process, the court usually has an edge, especially when you are seeking injunctions, injunctive relief, and things like that. So that is the point I, wait and think as to what should be the strategy, for me in the contracts, whether it should be litigation through court process or through arbitration process. I definitely, lean in favor of arbitration because arbitration, because of its swiftness and relatively lesser time it is taken to in an arbitration dispute versus a court process. So my preference usually, and also it merits upon whether what is the kind of a contract, what is the size of the contract, what are the type of reliefs we should expect under the contract. So when clients come to you, Mr. Banerjee, for advice, what is the litigation strategy, normally the clients seek from you, as to how they should proceed with the dispute resolution process? Or do you tell them that, well, in this case, if it were to be a court, it would have been a better proposition versus an arbitration? So do you face such challenges from your clients?
So that's a very pertinent question. There is no one size fits all answer. And because we have had a poor experience of arbitration earlier, maybe 5, 10, 15 years ago, a lot of clients have a very jaundiced view. Some public sectors have actually, I have been advising them, I was in government earlier, they have wiped out arbitration clauses. They've dropped arbitration clauses. So clients will come at two stages. One is when there are no disputes, when it's you're negotiating, or of course when there are disputes, then of course the answers are much more limited. You decide depending on the contract, depending on the clause, etc. But now the interesting thing about arbitration is that supposing somebody comes to you and asks you, what are the sorts of things you have to think about? One, say it's an international transaction, then both parties will push you towards an arbitration clause. That's a different matter. If you have a choice, I will go to a court or I will do an arbitration. Then you have to weigh up the pros and cons. One thing which really makes a huge difference to me is who will be the arbitrator. How do you negotiate that? Do you go to a reputed institution? Can you afford such an institution, a CIAC or an ICC or an LCIA? Some of our domestic institutions, MCIA is good, DIAC is good. Do you have an institutional clause? Do you have a clause which is ad hoc? You end up appointing retired Supreme Court judges. Is that what you really want? So I think you have to really think long and hard about inserting an arbitration clause, particularly who will be the arbitrator. So far as injunctions, etc. are concerned, now the situation after the amendment of section 9 and 17, and particularly after this judgment of Justice Nariman in this Amazon matter, with which I was also associated, you can get a good order from an arbitrator very quickly. Of course, it has to be institutional. But again, you have to be very careful when you choose. So I think the answer is that there's no simple answer. Of course, now one leans more towards arbitration because the weapons there are more than they were earlier. But even then, you have to think it through, particularly what is the composition of the tribunal and what are the rules that you are signing on to before you go for your arbitration. And if it doesn't suit, then our commercial courts are excellent. We have a very good experience in the Delhi High Court. Commercial courts are very good. So again, one other question is, if you have an arbitration, where will you make the seat? Will you make it Delhi or Bombay or Chennai, Calcutta? That's another issue. So number of issues, no simple answer, but options are much more now than they were 5 years ago.
Wonderful. So another point of discussion, Mr. Banerjee, is, thanks to the Supreme Court again, that they have now acknowledged the international arbitration provision, even for the contracting parties, if all of them are the Indian parties. So now, there was a lot of debate till the recent Supreme Court judgment. But now, since we now have a clean air in terms of the Indian parties opting for international arbitration also. So let me tell you my view. So when we are working in a Indian multinational, or when we are working in a foreign multinational, the law departments and the litigation teams definitely have a view, a very strong view, in terms of what should be the choice of international arbitration. So they all tend to be with the view that, for example, if it's a foreign company, the view will be that we should have the parent organizations, jurisdictions as the preferred seat of arbitration, because most of the lawyers will be based out there. They are more aware of that jurisdiction. For example, United States. Then they will say that if we have international arbitrations, so the one is arbitration in the United States, and then they say that if there is any other subsidiary in India, for example, let that Indian subsidiary follow arbitration from London. And then they would say that don't use India, don't use any other jurisdiction, but only use London. So for a very long time, we have been able to convince the other party or our parent organization that due to public policy reasons in India, Indian contracting parties cannot have an international arbitration. But since now the Supreme Court has approved that, so what do you think would be the preference? So I can tell you about myself that I think people like me who are GCs, we will do our best to convince that arbitrations in India should be preferred, because we have a big dominance. We are present in India. We have excellent counsels in India. We have excellent arbitration facilities in India. But it will still perhaps take some more time and work to show and demonstrate that why India should be the preferred choice for an international arbitration, or why in a view where international arbitrations are permitted for Indian contracting parties, that it will take a little while to convince them. So sir, in your view, what have you, been sought advice by your clients, especially when you speak for, big corporations or big clients, big foreign companies in India, as to what is their view on having an international arbitration clause in an Indian contract, which is signed by all Indian parties? For example, an Amazon India versus a Boeing India signing a contract and having an arbitration, say, in Delaware. So do you have a view on that, sir?
Very interestingly, I mean, the judgment, of course, that you talk about PASL Wind Solutions, I mean, it's a very positive judgment, but in some senses, it waters down the Indian jurisdiction, because now you can go abroad to Indian companies can do it. But this is again a matter of negotiation. For instance, the Amazon dispute is between Amazon and Future, and the seat is Delhi. It is an Indian arbitration. Maybe SIAC is administering it, but it's an Indian arbitration seated in Delhi. So you can negotiate it. Even giants like Amazon can agree to an India seated and have agreed to an India seated arbitration. I think people are perceiving it, but it is a mindset which is still in the process of change. A lot of us say something in public and then say, oh, lovely, I will go to London to do my arbitration. I'll go to Singapore to do the arbitration. Why? It is more expensive there. It is not really your home turf. We have as good lawyers. We have as good arbitrators. You can have an international organization like a SIAC or an ICC or an LCIA, and the seat can be India. There have been many such arbitrations in the last 4 or 5 years. I've appeared in a number of them. But you are right. It is little difficult even now to convince foreign parties to have India seated arbitration, because there are legacy issues where they feel they've burnt their fingers 10, 15 years ago. So I think what is important is, and we also need the help of the government, and we also need the help of the industry to present our case. Go to Singapore, the Singapore government says how wonderful it is. The lawyers say how wonderful it is. The clients say how wonderful it is. But it isn't. It is good. But we have equally good facilities. In fact, now in Hyderabad, a new facility has been set up, which is just been inaugurated. Some of our arbitrators are world class. Some of our lawyers are world class. Cost is much less in India. So I think it is really for GCs and lawyers like us to let go of this colonial mentality and present our case, because on every front, we are actually very, very progressive. Much more than, say, for instance, in Dubai. Our laws are much more progressive. We are at par with a Singapore or a London in terms of the legal framework. The courts are helping us. So I think you are right, but I think we should, do a little more PR, which we are always self-criticizing ourselves. You'll never find somebody from Singapore coming to India and saying, my system is a problem. Let me give you one example. I'm sorry, I'm going off topic. We introduced a provision called 29A. You are familiar with it. 1.5 years you have to deliver an award. Huge criticism in India. I went and mentioned this in Singapore. All these Singaporeans said, how can you do this? How can you do this? After the speech was over, an old man came to me and said, sir, this is an excellent thing that India has done. There is a Singaporean Chief Justice, who I will not name, who has sat on his award for 3 years. It's not different abroad. They just cover it up better.
That's great. That's great, sir. So, that leads us to our last topic, which is, the proposed mediation law in India. As a general counsel, I read that proposed law. The impression I get from that law is definitely it's a step in the right direction. But it leaves me that, people have mixed views about the mediation law as to how effective it could be as a strategy, for resolving disputes, and whether it would be binding. And if it is going to be binding, then what does it substitute? So if you already have an arbitration law in place, what is the benefit that the mediation brings on table? Because we do not want to see a process that we have signed in a contract that parties mediate as per the mediation law in India. It goes in the same direction as the arbitration, how it is practiced in India in terms of delays and complexities. So the question which comes to my mind is whether that mediation law will solve or whether it will only complicate a lot of things. The intention of the mediation law is very clear, that before you go for arbitration, you mediate and you resolve quickly. But the question from a practical standpoint is whether it's a good strategy, whether at all we should have the mediation law, or whether it should have been some amendment in the arbitration regulations itself that could have been perhaps a better way to approach it. Is that you have two laws, it's a good intent to resolve the disputes through a mediation, but I get worried about the delays and the complexity it could go and it could bring when we are trying to resolve first through mediation and then through arbitration. So sir, what do you think? What's your view on that?
So Akhilji, I am actually quite positive about this. Even though I am an arbitration specialist, I actually feel that if this mediation bill goes through and it is properly implemented, then people like you and me, I may be put out of business, but it will be good. It will be much better resolution. There are many positives to mediation. We are one of the signatories to the Singapore Convention. My issue with mediation, and I'll come to it in a moment. If mediation is properly run, and you would have looked at the bill is very interesting. The bill says you will have compulsory mediation for 3 months, 90 days. If you have good, well-trained mediators, and arbitrators are not necessarily good mediators, lawyers require training to be good mediators. But if you have good mediators, and I've seen it in commercial matters, because under the Commercial Courts Act, mediation is compulsory. If you have good mediators, even in commercial matters, in 90 days, you can handshake and settle. And believe me, if that happens, a GC of Boeing or a GC will be so happy. There is already a form of mediation which is there in public sector undertaking called OEC, Outside Expert Committee. This is a way of saving money. This is a way of not going to a full-fledged arbitration. Arbitrations, unfortunately, have become expensive. I actually feel if the mediation bill goes through and it is compulsory that in 90 days you must mediate before you go to an arbitration, or even before you go to court commercially, because Section 89 of the Civil Procedure Code is replaced. Part 3 of the Arbitration and Conciliation Act has been replaced. Section 28 of the Contract Act has been amended. Commercial Court has been amended. Legal Services amended. If this is pushed through, and I know for a fact that the present CJI is very keen on mediation. He suggested it in that Lalit Modi, Beena Modi case also. And if you push in mediation, if it works, it will be a game changer. Mediation of 2021 will be as much of a game changer as arbitration of 96 and 2015, if it works. And that's the caveat. And I want to close by mentioning a sad story. And that is where the problem comes. So normally in these contracts, there are mediation clauses that you go to a mediator. If that fails, then you go to arbitration. Mediation in 90 days. So this clause was invoked by one of my clients. They went, the chairman appointed a mediator who was a retired High Court judge. Instead of 90 days, he bullied the parties. He took 6 months. He made it into a mini arbitration and gave an award. That is completely defeating the purpose. You want a quick resolution in 30 days, 90 days. If you can handshake, finish it. So with that caveat, I really feel that, it is something that can work, but we need a lot more training. Like you said, you are also very skeptical. I am little more positive about it. We need proper trained mediators, and if we can do it, it will not kill arbitration. It will streamline it in a much better way.
Thank you, sir. So if we were to summarize our thoughts, I think my takeaway from this conversation is that thanks to the recent developments, whether from the Supreme Court side, whether from the lawmakers side, we have covered a lot of ground. We have definitely implemented a lot of good work has gone into to demonstrate that India should be the preferred choice for arbitrations. It is definitely a welcome step that we are looking at a mediation law also. And as you rightly say, it is upon us to make good of such opportunities, that with a better arbitration processes in India, with the absolutely excellent support from the Supreme Court of India to recognize the international awards and implement the international awards in India, and clear the way for any kind of a doubt that people can obstruct arbitrations in India, foreign arbitrations in India, then allowing the arbitrations to be implemented in the contracts, the international tribunals to be a part of the Indian contract. That is also a welcome step. And mediation bill, if we do our, we should make use of this opportunity to make the most of the mediation law also. So that seems to be my takeaway, sir, from this conversation. Would you like to add anything, sir?
I think you have summed it up very, very well. We have gone a long way in international arbitration, and hopefully we may have to undertake a similar journey in mediation. It's just a few steps behind. If we can make as much of a success of mediation as we have of arbitration, I think we will do very well as a nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Banerjee, for your thoughts. It's been a wonderful discussion.
Thank you so much, Akhilji. That's been very, very helpful.